When you think about history, are there lots of old guys wearing wigs and stockings? When you think about history, is Napoleon really short? And folks have wooden teeth. Do you know that history can be the most incredible, amazing stories for you and me? Sit back and listen to a story right now. It's honest, it's fun, and it's sure to.
Hi, young historians. Welcome to another episode of Anytime Now. I'm Brooke, co-founder of Honest History. Are you as excited about this episode as I am? I sure hope so. We're about to dive into another story-filled adventure and learn something new. And remember, by learning more about the past, you can make a positive impact on the future. So pack your bags and let's go.
Would you believe the United States nearly dropped a nuclear bomb on itself? It's true. In 1961, all that stood between North Carolina and a nuclear disaster was a simple flip of a switch. This crazy story involves a war, a plane crash, and two powerful nuclear bombs. Get ready, young historians. In this episode, we're going to uncover a near miss that could have caused a catastrophe. Let's travel to any time now. In 1961, it was a cold winter's day in Washington, D.C. The new U.S. President, John F. Kennedy, stepped to the podium to address a cheering crowd. He was about to give his inaugural speech. It was the first time he would speak to the American people as their president. That year, 1961, was an uncertain time. Kennedy was coming into office in the midst of a Cold War. Tensions were growing between the United States and the Soviet Union. No weapons had been fired directly, but the two countries were at the ready in case fighting broke out. The president wanted to offer the American people a message of hope during this difficult time. As the cheering crowd quieted down, he began to speak.
I do not believe that any of us would exchange places with any other people or any other generation. The energy, the faith, the devotion which we bring to this endeavor will light our country and all who serve it. And the glow from that fire can truly light the world.
Something made this Cold War between the U.S. and the Soviet Union especially scary, and that was something called the nuclear bomb. These deadly bombs could destroy entire cities in an instant. And both the U.S. and the Soviet Union had them. If war broke out, it would mean nuclear war. As the American people faced this terrifying reality, Kennedy wanted to lift their spirits.
And so, my fellow Americans, ask not what your country can do for you, ask what you can do for your country.
At the end of his speech, President Kennedy stepped back from the podium as the crowd cheered. Little did he or the American people know that just 3 days later, a nuclear bomb would drop from the sky, and the bomb didn't come from the Soviet Union. This is where our story begins. It was January 24th, 1961. The night sky was speckled with stars as a large plane flew above the dark ocean. The plane was called a B-52 bomber and carried very important cargo. Inside the aircraft sat 8 crew members and 2 nuclear bombs. These deadly weapons weighed over 6,000 pounds each and had an explosive yield of 3.8 megatons. That is 250 times more powerful than the bomb dropped on Hiroshima during World War II. The 2 bombs on board this flight were very large and very dangerous. This plane was on a standard mission. Like many other U.S. bombers at the time, it was flying over the Atlantic Ocean and back to the East Coast. This was part of the United States strategy during the Cold War. The U.S. military wanted to make sure it always had a bomber in the air in case the war with the Soviet Union broke out. There were at least 6 B-52 bombers in the sky at any time. It would be a long flight, and the bomber needed to refuel to complete its mission. At around midnight, the pilot spotted a tanker in the distance. These tankers were like flying gas stations that refueled other planes as they flew in the air. The bomber's pilot pulled close to the tanker. It hovered below the aircraft so that the tanker's refueling tube, known as the boom, could reach the bomber. Once the boom hooked on, fuel began pumping into the bomber. It was during this refueling that the tanker crew noticed something alarming. "You have a fuel leak," the crew radioed to the bomber's commander, Major Tulloch. The bomber detached from the tanker. "We can't see the leak from here," Major Tulloch told the tanker. "Can you drop back under us to take a look?" But it was dark, and the tanker crew couldn't see where the leak was coming from. Major Tulloch radioed ground control. "Ground control, this is Keep 1-9er. We have a fuel leak." The Air Force was going to send another plane up to investigate the leak. But things quickly got worse. "This is Keep 1-9er. We are losing a lot of fuel." In fact, the bomber had lost 37,000 pounds of fuel in just 2 minutes. The tanker flew close to the plane to take another look. This time it spotted pink liquid coming out of the bomber's wing. The small leak had now grown into a major crack. Major Tulloch told ground control about the wing. "Keep 1-9er. Assume a holding pattern until fuel is consumed." Ground control advised Major Tulloch to fly in circles off the coast until the extra fuel had burned off. This would make the plane lighter so it would be safer to land. The pilot turned the bomber and began following ground control's instructions. As they prepared for the worst, the crew checked the 2 bombs on board. The switches were all set to the safe position so the bombs would not detonate in case of a crash. Soon after, ground control told Major Tulloch to make an emergency landing at the Air Force Base. "Keep 1-9er, Air Force Base approach. Cleared for the ILS, runway 26. Advise the runway in sight. Good luck." Major Tulloch commanded the pilot to turn the bomber towards the Air Force Base and begin their descent. As they got closer to the airfield, they heard a loud crack. Something was wrong. They soon realized that part of the wing had torn off. The bomber rotated sharply, and the crew quickly lost control of the plane. "Bail out!" Major Tulloch shouted. He had ordered the men to abandon the aircraft. The bomber's hatches were pushed open. Some of the men grabbed their parachutes and jumped out through the openings. Others used their ejection seats to escape. They parachuted down through the sky as the plane plummeted towards the ground. 5 of the 8 men landed safely below. 3 crew members, sadly, did not survive the crash. And there was something else. Shortly after the men jumped from the aircraft, the 2 bombs also fell out of the plane. As the bomber tumbled out of the sky, the first bomb was flung into the air. It twisted out of its rack, which pulled out its safety pins. Once these pins were removed, the bomb began its drop sequence. A parachute launched out of the weapon and carried it through the sky. Little did anyone know, a nuclear bomb was now dropping towards North Carolina. Flashes of light could be seen in the sky as the plane burst into flames and broke out into pieces. Part of the plane crashed into the farmland below. Its wreckage was scattered across 1.5 miles of land. Air Force teams arrived at the site of the wreckage quickly. They wanted to make sure the bombs could be removed safely. They spotted one of the bombs standing upright with its parachute caught in the trees nearby. The team approached it cautiously. They knew the parachute was a part of its drop sequence. Had the bomb been close to detonating? Some of the team asked themselves. They quickly disconnected the weapon to make sure it could not explode and reported back to the Air Force Base. They would eventually learn just how close they had been to a catastrophe. One switch stood between the United States and a nuclear explosion. This one switch had a very simple design, and an electrical short during the accident could have caused the bomb to arm itself. Thankfully, that had not happened, and the bomb did not detonate. As the Air Force received news that the first bomb had been disconnected, they were busy hunting for the second one. They found it, near a smoking pile of burnt aircraft pieces, but it would not be easy to get to. It was buried deep under the mud. For 3 days, a team dug into the soggy ground to reach the weapon. It had smashed into pieces as it hit the earth, and they needed to find the switch to make sure it was set to safe. Finally, they found what they were looking for. "Lieutenant, we found the switch!" one of the men shouted. "Great." "Not great. It's on arm," the man replied nervously. The rest of the officers stopped in their tracks. The switch had been turned on. The nuclear weapon appeared to be armed and functioning, but for some reason, the bomb had not exploded.
Hi friends, are you enjoying today's episode? I'd like to take a quick break from the story to tell you about another great place to learn about the past. Honest History creates magazines and books for kids that are filled with fun stories and activities that bring history to life. From pirates to spies to great inventions and so much more, you'll learn about interesting people, places, and events from around the world that made history. Created for kids ages 6 through 12, you can sign up and receive new adventures delivered straight to your doorstep every quarter. Just visit honesthistory.co. That's honesthistory.co to sign up today. Oh, and here's a special offer for our podcast listeners. Use code ANYTIMENOW for 10% off. Again, that special code is ANYTIMENOW. Okay, let's get back to the story.
They would eventually learn that although the switch had been flipped to arm, the bomb's electrical parts had been disconnected during the crash. The weapon, thankfully, wasn't able to detonate. The team continued the search for the rest of the weapon. They used pumps to drain the water out of the mud and placed pieces of wood around the massive hole to make sure the ground didn't fall in. The men's hands and feet froze in the cold, wet ground as they dug deeper and deeper. After 8 days, they found almost all of the pieces. There was only one part still missing, but the search would have to end, and the final piece of the bomb would remain buried deep in the ground. An investigation would have to be carried out to understand what exactly happened the night of the accident. Why had the bomber crashed? Why had the bombs been switched to arm? And why didn't they detonate? These were all questions that needed to be answered. Few wanted to imagine the destruction the two bombs would have caused. Thousands of people would have died, and thousands more would have been injured. Many others would have gotten sick from the radiation caused by the explosion. After an investigation, it was discovered that the bombs had a design flaw. They needed to be fixed immediately to make sure there wouldn't be risk of disaster in the future. There was also the question of the bomber. Why had its wing broken? The answer was that the wing had been put under too much stress. The B-52 bomber's wings didn't just help the plane lift off the ground, they also carried fuel. Engineers realized the fuel was too much for the wings, so they made the structure stronger to carry the heavy load. It seemed that the Air Force had narrowly escaped a catastrophe. Although the details of the accident remained top secret for many years, the event became known as the Goldsboro B-52 crash. Today, you will find a sign in Eureka, North Carolina to remember the accident. The sign reads, "Nuclear mishap, B-52 transporting 2 nuclear bombs crashed January 1961. Widespread disaster averted. 3 crewmen died 3 miles south." The military calls an incident like this, where they lose nuclear weapons, a broken arrow. Officially, the military stated that there was no danger in the bombs exploding. The weapon safety mechanisms worked in the end, and the bombs did not detonate. But others argue it was too close of a call. One switch could have turned a terrible crash into an absolute catastrophe. Even now, part of the nuclear bomb remains buried under the ground. When the military couldn't find the last piece of the second bomb, the US government filled up the hole and purchased the land to make sure no one could build or farm there. So, somewhere under a field in North Carolina, there is a piece of one of the world's deadliest weapons. It is a reminder of the time the US narrowly avoided a nuclear disaster.
Welcome back! What did you think of today's adventure? We hope you learned something new. Be sure to share the story with your friends and family, and use what you've learned today to go out there and make a positive impact on history yourself. That's all for now, but if you want to learn more about important and amazing stories from the past, be sure to subscribe to Honest History Magazine, where you'll discover stories from around the world. Thanks for listening. This episode was narrated by Randall Lawrence and written by Heidi Coburn. Production was led by Robot Pirate Media. To learn more about Honest History, visit us at honesthistory.co and follow along for updates on social media.